Hello everybody, this is Billy and this is the Billy Goat channel. This video I'm doing right now is something I've been working on for a couple of months now, and the original concept was basically me trying to persuade people on the right hand side of the aisle basically to vote for Joe Biden, and I'd be laying out the reasons why I thought they should do that. But of course, I always underestimate how long it's going to take to do a video like this, and so it ended up running past Election Day. But I put so much work into this video that I figured I'd put it out anyway, and it'll just be me explaining why I voted the way I did and what I think it means for the future with Joe Biden as our new president. So, without further ado, let's get into it. This is Modern Happenings. So everyone knows that 2020 has been an absolute shit show of a year. Between the COVID pandemic, wildfires raging across Australia, California, and the Pacific Northwest, massive civil unrest and rioting, and then of course murder hornets, because why not? You know, just throw in some killer wasps for no reason. But behind all that, in the midst of all that insanity, we had the 2020 election between Donald Trump and Joseph Biden. And that's where our story begins, with a tale of two shitties. Bum 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 bum. That's right. This year, it was another election. And this time, our amazing two-party system laid out before us another uninspiring, depressing choice between Joe Biden, the prototypical neoliberal establishment dude, and Donald Trump. Who's Donald Trump? You know, I'm not gonna... We'll get into it, okay? But basically, here we have another choice between neoliberalism and neo-fascism. Two sides of the same dingy coin that we always flip every 4 years. But despite how unsavory that decision was to me, a Bernie Sanders supporter, I still found it pretty easy to make my final decision on who to vote for. And it all came down to this simple question. On the core social and economic issues facing Americans today, has Donald Trump done enough to deserve a second term as president? So that's basically what it boiled down to for me. Here's Donald Trump. He's asking to be president again. And does he deserve it? And my response to that question? Nah, dude. Nah. So to judge Donald Trump's performance over the last 4 years, I looked at 5 core issues that were most important to me and that I feel in practical terms are the most important to all Americans, regardless of your party affiliation or any of those kind of defining factors. And those core issues are as follows: the COVID-19 response, economic policy, healthcare, racial inequality, and climate change. So let's start with the big one first, COVID-19. I know a lot of people think that describing the Donald Trump administration as fascist is a little bit hyperbolic or overblown in some way, but I think he does demonstrate a lot of authoritarian qualities. And one of those qualities is this idea of hyper-nationalism, where everything the country does is great, everything the administration does is wonderful and perfect, and things have never been better, no matter what the actual situation on the ground looks like. And you see this dynamic play out in the Trump administration's COVID-19 response. There's this kind of propaganda that he's laid out over these many months where everything's fine, everything's great. Oh, the record number of deaths, not a big deal. Oh, it's just because we're testing too much. We need to stop testing because, testing is what gives you COVID. I guess that's his theory. When you put the test in your nose, those are like Chinese swabs, and it goes in and it deposits the COVID in your nose. So if you don't test, then people, they don't show COVID. I guess that's the brilliant theory. I don't know. But obviously, that's not what the situation really is. The reality of the situation is that the United States, as presumably the wealthiest, most advanced nation in the world, has literally the worst COVID response and the worst situation out of any country on the planet. That's the reality. And you can see that in this slide here. You got, Mr. Macho Man America. And then you've got what's really going on. Just a sick, feeble country barely hanging on for dear life because our president is either too lazy or too stupid to actually deal with this problem. Now let's look at some of the statistics here. So COVID in the USA. The crazy thing is that the data on this slide here is actually out of date already. It shows USA with 217,071 COVID deaths. The number one in the world. Go USA. We rule. And then if you want to look at it on a kind of ratio, deaths per million people, we're 11th, behind some of these other countries, Belgium, Spain. But just in absolute terms, we are failing miserably at containing this virus. And I'm going to put up this next slide because I'm recording this on November 27th. It's about a little over a month since I actually started working on this, and the numbers have gone up dramatically. We're now at 262,673 deaths. So almost 50,000 more in just a month. The truth is, it didn't have to be this way. It absolutely did not have to be this way. The idea that we, America, couldn't do as well as these other countries, the idea that we did everything we could, we tried so hard, but we just couldn't do it. Well, that's kind of bullshit. Let's look at this. This country here, New Zealand, or as I like to call it, Science Island, is a small island nation off the coast of Australia. And it's, it's a magical place where the leaders believe in science and they accept the word of epidemiologists and biologists, and they try to make informed decisions based on comprehensive studies to, basically they're just not fucking idiots. But anyway, so New Zealand has a population of about 5 million people. That's comparable to our state of South Carolina. I believe they have a population of around 5 million as well. They're led by this nice lady named Jacinda Ardern of their Labour Party, which is their left-wing party in New Zealand. And what New Zealand did was they actually locked down. They actually said, you know what? We're not gonna sit here and just sneeze on each other and like cough in each other's mouths for like 9 months straight. We're gonna close things down. We're gonna hang out, bunker down for about 6 weeks, and we're gonna see what happens. And what do you know? Miraculously, they got rid of COVID completely. And the most amazing part of it is they did that, and they only had 25 deaths in the entire country. Basically, you could take all of the people that died of COVID in New Zealand and put them in a small, like a kindergarten classroom. That's how many people died there. And I know people are probably thinking, well, Billy, New Zealand has a very small population. Of course they're going to have a small number of people die of COVID. But let's go back to that South Carolina comparison I made. South Carolina has like 16,000 COVID deaths. 16,000 with their population of 5 million. But it really goes to show the difference between a strategy based in kind of solid, sound science versus our haphazard, every state for itself method that hasn't really worked out too well for us. I know that a lot of Trump supporters will make the claim that Trump did everything he could during the first few months of the pandemic to try to keep it under control. And, you know, he'll blame it on China, which, I mean, is true. But if you look at a timeline of those first few months, like January to April, you'll see some pretty glaring missteps. The first U.S. coronavirus case was detected in Washington state on January 21st. Then, 2 weeks after that, on February 2nd, Trump banned travel from China, which that was the right thing to do. And it was fairly quick after those cases arose that he did that. On February 7th, Trump said to Bob Woodward in an interview, "You just breathe the air and that's how it's passed. It's also more deadly than even your strenuous flus." It shows that even at that early stage of the pandemic, Trump was completely aware that this wasn't just your average flu. He knew how it was transmitted, and he knew that it was much more deadly than the regular flu. At the end of February, on the 24th, was when we had the stock market crash, and basically all of the gains that had been made over the past 4 years were pretty much demolished. This one aged well. Trump tweets, "Corona is very much under control." I mean, basically, Trump here is just trying to reassure the financial markets that, oh, everything's okay, everything's going to be fine, because as a rich person, the stock market's one of the most important things to him. So let's continue on. March 6th, Trump, during a visit to the CDC headquarters in Atlanta, said, "You have to be calm, it'll go away." I mean, yet here we are in November, and we're having the worst wave of the coronavirus yet. And we just had Thanksgiving yesterday, so you would expect the cases to rise even further. And we're already seeing the death rates exceeding what they were back in May, so it's definitely not going away. On March 11th, Trump banned travel from Europe with exceptions for the United Kingdom and Ireland. And here's the problem with that. So there's basically this month-long gap between when he banned travel from China and when he banned travel from Europe. And in that time, people were coming from China into Europe, and from Europe traveling into the United States, primarily through New York, which is a big, hub for travel and that kind of thing. So really the reason that New York had such a severe outbreak at the beginning was because Trump had only blocked travel from one country, and that's China. People were still coming from everywhere else in the world. On March 19th, also to journalist Bob Woodward, Trump says, "To be honest with you, I wanted to always play it down." That's all you need to know right there, people. I think of it this way. If you had cancer, if you suspected you had cancer and you went to the doctor, you had some tests done, and you go to the doctor and he's giving you your results back, do you want the doctor to lie to you and tell you, no, you're fine. Those lumps, those were just some benign cysts. You don't have cancer. You're going to be fine. When actually you do have cancer, it's stage 4, and you're going to be dead in a week. So there, Trump basically admits that he's been playing it down the whole time. And then we come to April 3rd, when finally wearing masks is recommended after weeks of stalling from the White House. By the way, this wasn't Trump coming out and telling people to wear masks, which would be the responsible thing to do as a president. He just finally allowed people like Dr. Fauci to come out and say, yeah, you probably should wear a mask. He'd literally been telling these doctors for weeks and weeks, no, don't talk about masks. We don't need masks. And then finally he caved in, 3 months after the pandemic starts. So overall, it was like pulling teeth to get any kind of guidance from the administration in those first few months. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to acknowledge the actual severity of the problem at any point. Things never got better. Trump's response to the pandemic really never improved. No matter how many people died, you know, despite the fact that it went on, we had that spike in April and May, the first wave. We had another wave in June, July, you know, around the time of the 4th of July and Memorial Day and that kind of thing. And then we're having another wave now. And at no point did he ever seem to take it seriously. At the first debate with Trump and Biden, Trump made fun of Biden for wearing a mask. He said, oh, you'll stand 200 feet away from people and wear a mask. And then, of course, Trump gets COVID and all these people in his administration get COVID because they don't care about it. They had this super spreader event at the White House when they nominated Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, where a lot of senators, high up people in the government, they were just all, you know, cozying up to each other. And I want to say like 30 people got COVID at that event. And then there's the fact that when Trump got COVID, of course, he goes to a government hospital. He gets an experimental antibody treatment that's not even available to the public. He gets in an SUV with Secret Service agents, putting them at risk of catching COVID, just so he can drive around the hospital and wave to his supporters. And just his attitude towards the whole thing is just so nonchalant. He doesn't give a shit. And it's really apparent. It's really, truly insane to me, just the level of disregard Trump's had throughout this whole thing. And this is a crisis that has killed the equivalent of 88 9/11s. 88 9/11s so far. Yeah, I know it says 72 on this sheet, but again, this is out of date. Here's the edit. 88 9/11s. So let's move on to economic policy, and I'm going to focus on 3 areas within that: taxes, wages, and trade. So the entire Republican orthodoxy on economics is honestly disgusting. I mean, it basically just entails a kind of wealth redistribution, but instead of from rich people to poor people, it's the other way around. That's the whole basis of the trickle-down economics theory, is that the more money you give to rich people, the better it's going to end up being for workers. Just help the people at the top out. They really need it. And, you know, the sweat that's pouring off of their bodies from all their hard work and entrepreneurship, all that sweat will just drain down, and then the teeming masses below can lick at the sweat, get some sustenance from those little sweat drops just coming off of these hard-working patriots, you know, these millionaires and billionaires. That's basically the Republican economic policy. And this was demonstrated perfectly in the tax cut bill that Donald Trump passed in 2017. Now, the official name of this bill, of course, you gotta spice it up a little bit, make it sound good. The official name is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. So I've got this chart here that I wrote up, and it shows that every tax bracket did get a little bit of a tax cut through this bill that was passed. You can see, for example, I'm in that third bracket up from the bottom, the 38,000 to 82,000 one. So in that income range, I would see my taxes fall from 25% to 22%. Everyone in America would see a slight benefit from this on their tax bill. But the thing to realize is that these changes are all temporary and they expire in 2025. And this is the reason why I think this bill should have been named the Corporate Welfare Act of 2017, because that's really what it is. You can see the corporate tax rate went from 35% down to 21%, which is, what's that, a 14% drop? And those changes are permanent. You really see where their priorities were with this bill. Donald Trump was doing something that would largely benefit himself and other rich people like him, and then throwing out a little crumb to the normal people to make them feel like they were getting, you know, this huge savings on their tax bill, when that's not really what was going on. And before this bill was passed, Republicans in Congress were claiming, oh, this is going to create huge amounts of jobs. Workers are going to see their wages rise greatly because corporations are going to have more money to pay them. And obviously that didn't happen. And the reason that didn't happen is because no one's forcing these corporations to raise their workers' wages. What they're doing is they're giving themselves bonuses. They're using those tax savings to buy back their own stocks, which they did to the sum of about $1 trillion. And not only that, but it's actually bad for society at large, because now the federal deficit has risen by almost $2 trillion over the next 10-year period. Basically, it just means that the government is taking in a lot less money, which means less money for social programs, less money for infrastructure. The final nail in the coffin is that wages for production and non-supervisory workers grew by only 1.2%. So their whole excuse for this tax bill didn't even happen. Workers didn't even see a benefit from this tax bill in any meaningful way. It only helped, you know, corporations and rich people. So briefly, just to touch on stocks a little bit, you know, Donald Trump will focus endlessly on the stock market. I'm sure he wakes up every morning when he's eating his McDonald's breakfast and chugging down his Diet Coke and his PJs, watching Fox News. I'm sure he's looking at the stock market numbers. He's really in tune to that because that's the world he lives in. But for most Americans, wages are more relevant to their economic well-being than the stock market. You know, I don't own stocks, so it doesn't really have an impact on me. And 84% of all stocks are owned by the wealthiest 10% of Americans. So these people at the very top own the majority of the stocks. They're the ones who really care about, you know, the ups and downs of the stock market. So every time Trump brings up, you know, Wall Street, the Dow Jones, NASDAQ, and all that shit, it just doesn't matter to the majority of people. And so, you know, the reason Trump cares about stocks so much is because that's affecting his bottom line and the financial situation of those in his kind of social circle, his class level. Let's just set the stage real quick here. The top 10% of Americans own 77% of the total US wealth, while the bottom 50% own 1%. So the poorest people in America, the poorest half of Americans, own just 1% of the whole wealth. Sounds about right. 10% of families have negative net worth, meaning more debt than assets. 40% of households can't afford a $400 emergency. So that's basically our economic situation right now. And in the midst of that, there's people who think that we shouldn't raise the minimum wage at all. The easiest way that Congress could improve the financial well-being of Americans is just to raise the minimum wage. It's super, super simple. You know, there's this idea that people who work retail jobs, fast food jobs, things like that, for some reason they don't quite deserve to be able to support their families. If they wanted to be able to support their families, well, they have to just get another job. And that's BS. Since 1938, when it was $0.25 an hour, the minimum wage has been raised 9 times through legislation up to its current level of $7.25, set in 2009. So it is routine to raise the minimum wage. That's what you're supposed to do because inflation happens. And if you don't raise the minimum wage, then people aren't going to be able to afford food, housing, basic needs. And basically that's what's happened in recent years, is that individual states and cities have had to raise their minimum wage in order to help their citizens survive ever increasing prices. So the benefit of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour would be that it would raise the wages of 39.7 million workers, or just over a quarter of all wage earners. When I was researching this and reading about the benefits of raising the minimum wage, it's not just those people that are at minimum wage. It causes corporations and businesses to adjust everyone who is making more than the minimum wage in proportion to what that increase was. Now, the crazy thing is, if the minimum wage was tied to the amount of goods and how productive workers are being, instead of just being kind of an arbitrary number that's being decided by Congress, if it were tied to productivity, it would be over $20 an hour right now. That just leads me to the conclusion that we're all getting screwed, basically. I mean, what other way can you look at it? It's kind of like, say you went and mowed somebody's lawn and they paid you $20, right? And then the next week you go over and the guy you're working for tells you to mow 3 lawns and he still tries to give you $20. Well, you'd be like, hell no, dude, I just did like 3 times the work. I'm not gonna take $20 again, give me $60. That's basically what's going on across our entire economy, is that people are working harder and harder and harder, and the wages are being artificially suppressed at the whims of these corporations who just don't want to pay you. That's all there is to it. A lot of things you'll hear, like on Fox News or, conservative media, is just people trying to convince you that giving you a raise would somehow hurt the economy. And it's always some rich dude. Oh no, we can't possibly raise wages. Well, that would cause inflation, and we're already experiencing inflation. Inflation's already happening. You have to raise the minimum wage in response to inflation. You don't just stop raising the minimum wage. That's what's so insane about this. That gap there between what the minimum wage is right now, which is $7.25, and what it should be based on our productivity is I'm calling it the exploitation gap. Okay, I don't know if I invented that term, but that's basically what it is. People are being exploited. They're essentially being robbed. Finally, trade. I don't want to spend too much time on trade, but Donald Trump did make a pretty big deal out of this in the 2016 campaign against Hillary Clinton. Trump's entire trade policy has really revolved around the use of tariffs, which are basically just taxes that you put on the goods that another country manufactures. And he's really focused a lot on China because, they are an adversary, you could say. But yeah, he's basically like Oprah with tariffs, you get a tariff, you get a tariff, you all get tariffs, and just slapping them everywhere, slapping them with the tariffs. The only problem is that when you do that, the other country retaliates, which can have detrimental impacts on the American economy. U.S. manufacturers have been hurt by Trump's excessive use of tariffs, especially those industries that import iron, steel, and aluminum. And it's not just industries that are using these metals that are being hurt by Trump's trade wars. It's also farmers who are suffering from retaliatory tariffs on American-made soybeans, dairy, pork, apples, and potatoes. Basically, they're having to pay more just to ship their products overseas because now there's this kind of tit-for-tat tariff trading going on between the U.S., China, and other countries. Trump's trade policy is costing U.S. households an average cost of $500 to $1,700 per year due to inflated prices. And you can see those sources down there on that. So basically, Trump's strategy is just to, you know, use these tariffs like he has the biggest balls in the world, and just not really bother with any kind of negotiation. You know, those things are too subtle. He's just going to use the tariffs so that it looks like he's doing something productive, and never mind if it actually is having the opposite effect. And just two final points showing really that our trade situation is worse than before. So the trade deficit has been larger in each of Trump's first 3 years in office than in 2016, and is now at its highest level since 2008, when Barack Obama was elected. Also, as of July of this year, there were fewer Americans employed in the manufacturing industry than before Trump took office. So we've actually lost manufacturing jobs in total. All right, now let's talk about healthcare. This one's pretty personal to me because I'm a type 1 diabetic. My pancreas basically just crapped out on me at 8 years old. And yeah, it's just something I live with. So to me, the healthcare experience in America is a lot like being attacked by just a legion of leeches. Just, you know, you turn around, there's one stuck on your arm, you rip it off. Then there's one sucking on your neck, just taking your life force straight out of your jugular. It's horrible. So let's go through these various leeches that make up our wonderful healthcare system. You've got the Blue Cross Blue Shield leech. This specimen here feeds on deductibles and high premiums. Then you've got the debt collector leech, which feeds on unpaid medical bills and is relentless in its pursuit of prey. And then over there on the right, you got two more leeches. You got the ER leech. Anyone who's been to the ER knows this one's fucking ridiculous. A bloated, gluttonous bastard that feeds on unnecessary emergency room bills. And then finally, you've got Dr. Leech. Dr. Leech feeds on copays and expensive prescriptions, and it wears a lab coat, but it's still a leech. So not only do you have a healthcare system that seems designed to just suck as much money out of you as possible, but we don't even have good outcomes when you compare us to other high-income countries. So on this slide, you see when compared to countries like Australia, Canada, Sweden, the United Kingdom, America spends nearly twice as much as the average country, has the lowest life expectancy, the highest suicide rates, the highest chronic disease burden, and an obesity rate 2 times higher than the average of these OECD countries. I mean, that last one isn't too surprising. I mean, there's a lot of fat people in America. Also, about 530,000 medical bankruptcies are filed annually. So these are people that have so much medical debt that they literally they can't afford to pay it. They just get overwhelmed and swamped by these bills, and they have to go bankrupt. So Obamacare, which is also known as the Affordable Care Act, it was passed by President Obama. It definitely wasn't an ideal healthcare system, but it did make some major improvements to what we had before. Some of these protections are, you can't discriminate based on if you have a pre-existing condition. Children are allowed to stay on their parents' plans until they're 26. There's no more lifetime limits on medication and supplies. There's a lot of popular provisions in Obamacare that people still widely support to this day. But unfortunately, Obamacare is under attack. The Trump administration has been trying to get rid of Obamacare for basically his entire first term. They tried it right when he entered office, and the only reason that attempt to overturn it failed was because John McCain voted against it. And John McCain was dying at the time, so it was kind of like his last gasp effort to prevent them from overturning it. But now, Amy Coney Barrett is on the Supreme Court, which gives it a 6-3 conservative majority. And many of those conservative justices have expressed their support for getting rid of Obamacare. This slide here, it says on November 10th, the Supreme Court is scheduled to hear oral arguments in a case to overturn the rest of the Affordable Care Act. Obviously, we're past November 10th now. I don't think that they came to any conclusion. I don't think that they're going to overturn it. And I think really what it comes down to, I mean, this was a concern of people. I think it was a legitimate concern at the time I drew this picture and I started this. But I think at this point, Obamacare, what's left of it, is so popular that the Supreme Court doesn't even want to touch it, which is a good thing. I think it's interesting to look at what Trump's idea of a better healthcare plan would be. So here's the Trump plan. And this is a little quote from a town hall he did on NBC back in October. And I believe we have some audio from that. So let's take a listen.
The problem with Obamacare is not good. We'd like to terminate it, and we want a much less expensive healthcare that is a much better healthcare. The problem with Obamacare is it's basically never going to be great, and I want to give great healthcare.
Oh, okay. See, I thought they were gonna like overturn all these protections, like the pre-existing thing that was gonna, make me lose my health insurance for my diabetes and everything. But I feel much better now hearing his very detailed explanation of the kind of healthcare system that he wants to do. So Obamacare, bad. We want good. Bad, good. So we want good. Okay, I think I have it figured out at this point. I have just one quick question though. Why would Donald Trump and the Republican Party be fighting tooth and nail to overturn the ACA when they say they support its remaining provisions and could easily improve upon it with additional legislation? I think I have an incoming message from Captain Obvious. Let's see what it says. There is no replacement plan. Trump is lying. The Republicans are full of shit. They don't care if you die. They suck at the swollen teats of Big Pharma and the insurance companies. Sincerely, Captain Obvious. You know what? Captain Obvious always comes through for me. He really just breaks things down in a really digestible way. But in all seriousness, yeah, they don't give a fuck about your healthcare. They're not doing this for you. They're doing it to help the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies make more money off of you. So we talk about healthcare a lot in this country, and it begs the question, what does an affordable, quality healthcare system look like? Where would we look to find the answer to this eternal question? Well, the answer to that is you'd look at literally any other industrialized nation on earth, because they've actually figured this out already. It's called universal health care, or as Bernie Sanders likes to call it, Medicare-for-All. See, the fatal flaw of the US healthcare system is that it prioritizes profit over patients' well-being. Healthcare should be treated as a universal human right, not as a commodity to be bought and sold. Healthcare is not like Cheez-Its or like buying an iPhone. I don't want to choose between, do I want this healthcare that's going to cover heart attacks but not strokes? Or do I want this healthcare that has this size premium, but it's only covered in at a few hospitals or doctors? All these different things. I think what people really want out of something like healthcare is just guaranteed coverage. A single-payer Medicare-for-All system would eliminate premiums, deductibles, and co-payments and all medical treatments would be free at the point of service. The U.S. government would be able to negotiate directly with pharmaceutical companies, greatly reducing prices for prescription drugs. The coverage would be comprehensive, including dental and vision, and would be funded by an expanded payroll tax. And at the payroll tax, this is where most people start going, whoa, 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 taxes, whoa. I don't want to pay an additional payroll tax. But what you have to realize is that you're already paying a tax for Medicare. The thing is, it only applies for people that are, 55 and older, or whatever the age limit is. The Medicare system we have right now is just for elderly people. What people like Bernie Sanders are proposing is that you slightly increase that payroll tax that you're already paying, and then it covers everybody. It would just be a much more simple, efficient way of doing things. Abolishing private insurers would mean that patients would have access to virtually any doctor or hospital, no more complex coverage networks. And Medicare-for-All would save money by cutting back on administrative waste. So that's just my little spiel on Medicare-for-All. Every other country does it. Like, there shouldn't even be this debate about, oh, would it work? Can we afford it? Of course we can afford it. We're the richest country in the world. And the fact that people in Canada and, the Netherlands and little countries like this have the ability to pay for their citizens' health care and somehow we don't, it's just ridiculous. And it should really just be seen as what it is, which is a transparent attempt by these corporations to get more money out of you. That's usually what it is when we're talking about these kinds of issues. All right, let's move on to the next one, racial inequality. A lot of people accuse Donald Trump of being racist. He's simultaneously the great white hope, but also the best president for black people since Abraham Lincoln. It's amazing how he can just be, those two things simultaneously. But whenever he's asked about the things that he's done specifically for the black community, Donald Trump will always bring up the black unemployment rate. And he'll claim that under his administration, the black people have seen these huge drops in their unemployment numbers to levels never seen before. First of all, it's true. The black unemployment rate was at its lowest level ever, at least until the COVID pandemic hit and people were losing their jobs left and right. But what you have to look at is the overall trend. And if you take a look at this little chart here, you can see that since at least 2010, which was back when Obama was president, the black unemployment rate has been steadily declining. It declined, through 2012, 2014, 2016. It's been going down at a steady rate. Then Trump takes office and he decides that he's just going to start taking credit for this overall trend that's been happening for over a decade. That's obviously ludicrous. I mean, it was happening long before he took office, and there's no point on this chart that you can point to and say, oh, this is where the Trump policy took effect and it really started dropping. No, it's literally just a straight downward trend. So to me, that pretty much debunks his entire claim that he was doing something in particular to help the black community, at least as far as unemployment goes. But I mean, taking credit for something like that, that's not necessarily racist. I mean, that's just him bragging, right? But he's racist. He's racist. Hold on. Look at this shit. I mean, here's a whole list of things that are like blatantly racist. We can go through them, I guess. There's the whole calling Mexican immigrants rapists who are bringing drugs and bringing crime, despite studies showing that immigrants actually commit less crime than native-born Americans. There's when he questioned the innocence of the Central Park Five even after they were exonerated by DNA evidence. There's his Muslim ban. He retweets messages from white supremacists and neo-Nazis. When the woman was run over by a neo-Nazi in Charlottesville, Virginia, he said both sides were to blame and said there were some very fine people among those neo-Nazis. He's attacked NFL players for kneeling simply to protest systemic racism, calling them sons of bitches. He referred to Haiti and other African countries as shithole countries during an immigration meeting. He was the original propagator of the birtherism conspiracy theory against President Obama, and then now more recently against Kamala Harris. And of course, who could forget when on national television he told far-right militias, specifically the Proud Boys, to stand back and stand by. You know what? I don't know. I can't tell. I don't know if he's racist or not. Honestly. No idea. I just can't. This guy is fucking racist, dude. Like, for real. Like, he's racist. Earlier in the year, we had a trio of pretty high-profile, racially motivated murders by police. Well, 2 of them were by police. One of them was just by some vigilante redneck guys in Georgia who decided to lynch a guy in the middle of broad daylight. But George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor were all killed within like a 2-month span. And that set off some pretty serious protesting in cities across America and even worldwide. They were protesting. There's basically like 2 reactions that I've seen. There's a group of people that says, whoa, 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 this has got to stop, you know? This is crazy. And these people generally are supportive of the protesters, not necessarily of the looting and the rioting, but like, I don't like the rioting, obviously. I don't think it's productive, but you have to understand that in any situation where there's a societal ill and people are protesting against it, there's going to be a segment of those people acting independently that are just going to cause chaos. That always happens. You can go back through history and see some examples of this. So let's take a look. Let's start with a big one here. 24 AD, the cleansing of the temple. And who was the rioter in that situation? None other than Jesus. Yeah, that's right. Jesus went in there. He saw those greedy money changers. He started flipping over tables, destroying property. But usually the Christians, they kind of forget about that one. What about 1773, the Boston Tea Party? So the Boston Tea Party was basically a bunch of colonists before America gained independence that were mad at Britain for putting tariffs on various products, in this case, tea. And so a group of them formed a little posse and they went out onto the docks and they started throwing the tea overboard and just destroying, you know, all that Earl Grey, just going into the Atlantic. But I mean, that was white people rioting, so that's a different type of rioting, you know. That's okay, apparently. 1910 to 1920, you had the women's suffrage movement where women were protesting to get the right to vote. And guess what? There were some riots. Especially in England, they were very aggressive over there for some reason. They'd actually like throw bricks through windows and shit. And yeah, I mean, they were feisty over there. That happened. What about the 1960s, the civil rights movement? I'm sure everybody's seen the pictures of, you know, protesters getting sprayed with water hoses and having dogs sicked on them and shit. And yeah, there were riots. There were definitely riots during that time period. So the point I'm trying to get to is that you wouldn't look at any of those movements by themselves and say, oh, well, they were rioting. That means that the entire point of them being out there is discredited, like, instantly. Like, oh, And by the way, this is even back in the 60s, they were saying that about like Martin Luther King Jr. Like, oh, you really think we're going to give you civil rights and you're out here, your people are out here burning shit down? That's what they always do, okay? It's to act like what's going on now is any different is just ridiculous. It's honestly just a pattern of behavior that has occurred many times in history. I think it's important to realize that when people are out there at these BLM protests, they're not just protesting, George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. They're protesting a whole range of societal injustices that's supported by a huge body of research. Like, anyone that tries to claim that systemic racism isn't a thing, I think is just delusional, because it's not just police brutality. It's the drug war. It's mass incarceration. It's stop and frisk. Karens calling 911. It's income and wealth disparities between black families and white families that still persist after generations, that have passed since slavery. It's worse health outcomes, harmful stereotypes, etc., etc. You can look at the iceberg, check it out, So the issues that the BLM movement is protesting against are extremely broad and complex. And as with any protest, the best way and the only way to end the unrest is to solve the damn problem. So now we get to what's probably the most critical and existential threat out of all of these issues that I've already discussed, and that's climate change. Here's the main thing you need to know. Earth is undergoing an unprecedented spike in global temperatures caused by the accumulation of greenhouse gases that humans are releasing into the atmosphere, primarily via energy production and transportation. Fossil fuels are driving us to the brink of destruction, right? I'm talking lawnmowers, weed whackers, go-karts, ski-doos. Wait, do ski-doos use gas? I don't fucking know. But not just that, coal plants, the way we generate our electricity, all of these things are pumping carbon dioxide into the air constantly. Just think of all the cars you see on a daily basis when you drive to work, and just try to imagine that invisible gas coming out of the tailpipe, going up into the air. And when it's up there, it's trapping more and more heat, which is causing a shit ton of problems. So let's just take a look at some of these effects of climate change, in case you haven't been paying attention to what's been going on the last 30 years. Let's take a look. So I kind of divided this up into kind of ocean effects, and then the effects that take place on land, because it's not just about, most people think of the sea level rise. That's definitely an issue. But it also affects, things on land as well. So yeah, you have the sea level rise, you have ocean acidification, which is why a lot of our coral reefs are getting bleached out and dying off. And then you have larger, more intense hurricanes. The warmer water is basically what's supercharging these storms. And that's why, it seems like every storm that we have now, every hurricane, it's like, oh, we've never seen a storm this powerful before. It's devastating. We've never seen this kind of rainfall. It's like, yeah, that's climate change right there. And then, of course, on land, you've got extreme drought, which contributes to wildfires that we saw in Australia. All those poor little koala bears burning and shriveling up into a husk as their little eucalyptus trees are fucking getting, just incinerated. That's our fault. That's our bad. Then you have reduced crop yields, basically also related to drought. If you have land that was getting, rained on or whatever over all these past years, and then all of a sudden the climate's changing, suddenly you can't grow food there anymore. And when there's these massive food shortages, basically that's going to lead to a lot of people, especially in poor countries, just not having enough food to survive. And then finally, mass migrations. And this one's kind of funny because you'd think if you were a conservative who are typically kind of well, they say they're anti-illegal immigration, but the thing is, scientists say that they're expecting 1 billion climate refugees by the end of the century. So do you think all those billion people are going to be able to come over legally through our immigration system, or do you think they're going to be like hauling ass away from their, destroyed homes, trying to get to safety and doing so in a way that's extremely disruptive to society? Which way do you think it's going to play out? If I was a conservative concerned about immigration, I would want to do something about climate change to try to mitigate that. But the truth is that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, to some extent, are so tied into helping the fossil fuel industry that they aren't even concerned about that yet. They're not even worried about it, They're not worried about a lot of the shit that's going on, as far as these really intense weather events. Just to remind people again that climate change is something that's happening right now. Here's some things that have taken place just over this past year that are pretty crazy. In August, a record temperature of 130 degrees was recorded in Death Valley, California. That's like a worldwide record. The temperature in Siberia reached 100.4 degrees for the first time ever. That place that's got like, all the snow and the bears and the wolves and everything. Yeah, that place got to 100 degrees. There's been unprecedented wildfires in Australia and California, as I'd mentioned several times. Also in Siberia, the permafrost, which is this layer of soil that's basically always frozen because it's so cold there, it's starting to melt. And methane gas that is trapped below the surface is literally exploding outward and just releasing these huge gas clouds of methane. And methane just so happens to be like 80 times more potent of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So yeah, that's not good. And then a record number of hurricanes occurred this year, causing meteorologists to use the Greek alphabet to name these additional storms. So they went through the A to Z, then they're like, shit, what do we do now? They're like, shit, alpha, beta, gamma, all that shit. And now, I think the last one I saw was iota. So they're even pushing through the Greek. I don't know what they're gonna do after they get through the Greek. Maybe go to Klingon or some shit. I don't know. This shit's crazy, okay? Climate change, not a laughing matter. Now we get to this point in the segment where I ask, what has Donald done to address the problem? Is he making things better or is he making things worse? You know what he did. Okay. So here's all these dirty, dirty deeds that Donald did, okay? His environmental protection agency. Here's what they've done to protect the environment. They've made the USA the only country on Earth to leave the Paris Climate Accord. They've rolled back safety measures for offshore drilling implemented by Obama following the Deepwater BP explosion. You may have seen the movie starring Mark Wahlberg, where the oil rig explodes and starts spewing oil into the Gulf. And so Donald Trump's natural reaction to that was to say, hey, that wasn't that bad. Let's, why? It's all these regulations, man. These pesky regulations. Get rid of them. Get them out of here. Get them out. So now, there's just going to be oil rigs blowing up left and right, I guess. So they opened up the pristine waters of the Arctic to oil and gas extraction for the first time. They've rolled back regulations on the monitoring and mitigation of methane release. They've opened up national monuments, such as Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante in Utah, to mining operations. Blow that shit up. We need that precious, precious gold and silver. I don't care about you wanting to hike in these beautiful vistas, trying to make that money. He's rolled back fuel economy requirements for vehicles, allowing automakers to produce dirtier, more inefficient cars. He blocked a rule to phase out old and inefficient light bulbs. He's opposed water-saving appliances, such as toilets, shower heads, and dishwashers. And he appointed a former coal lobbyist named Andrew Wheeler as the EPA administrator. So when you take all of these things in total, this guy does not give a shit about the environment. He's just basically telling these oil, coal, mining companies, do whatever you want. Just drill, baby, drill. As if climate change isn't even happening. So, yeah, the climate legacy of Donald Trump is very poor, bad, F grade. In conclusion, the billionaire Donald J. Trump has mishandled and ignored the coronavirus pandemic to devastating effect, costing hundreds of thousands of Americans their lives, continued the prioritization of corporate interests which align with his own financial dealings, sought to further undermine the United States' broken healthcare system, intensified racial divisions through blatant dog whistling and fear-mongering while dismissing the legitimate grievances of the BLM movement, exacerbated the climate crisis by propping up and deregulating the fossil fuel industry, all while being a narcissistic asshole and a constant Twitter troll. I mean, it's actually kind of impressive how much damage he's managed to do. It really is. It's a feat. So, if there's any Trump supporters that have managed to get this far in the video without having an aneurysm, I know you're probably thinking like, hey, this video was called A Tale of Two Shitties. You can't just start talking about all the shit Trump's done and not bring up Biden. Like, are you serious? How are you going to do this? I'm about to engage in a type of argument that I probably would have found really frustrating, or, it's icky. It's the lesser of two evils thing, okay? And obviously we have a problem in this country when the presidential elections come down to which guy is less bad. But that's the world we live in, and it'd be foolish to pretend that one of these guys is not less bad than the other guy. It'd be foolish to pretend that the material outcomes of people's lives are not going to be different under Joe Biden than they would under Donald Trump, for all of the reasons that I've laid out, up to this point. The truth is, you can have two shits and they're not going to be equal. One shit will always be worse than the other. Either it's going to smell worse, it's going to be more gross looking, like some kind of weird, pudding consistency that just, sprays everywhere, or maybe it's got, worms in it. I don't know. I don't want to gross you guys out, but let's be real. There are worse levels of shit that are possible. And if Joe Biden's like your average kind of establishment status quo shit, then Donald Trump is like a hyena that ate a chunk of shit and then shit that shit out on top of the decomposing corpse of a flamingo. Like, that's the difference between these two guys, I swear. Like, it's not even close. But in all fairness, it is a tale of two shitties. So I'm going to go through all the reasons that Biden is still a shit. And that means it's time for a little fecal analysis. All right, let's magnify. Let's zoom in here. Wait, I don't know what the hell this is. Like, this is grainy as hell. Like, see, I don't know what I'm looking at here. This looks like a Minecraft screenshot or something. I need enhance. Okay, that's much better. Everything's crystal clear now. Okay, so let's really take a look at this little poop sample here. So starting at the top left, you got a little residual double bubble in there. You know, who knows how long that's been in there. Then you go down. So Joe Biden was one of the main architects behind the crime bills that were passed in the 90s that had a really, really big impact on minorities. They were basically just tools to increase mass incarceration. There were some really harsh penalties. Things like, you know, there being these disparities between people who were arrested for powder cocaine versus people who were arrested for crack cocaine, and they would punish the crack cocaine people a lot worse, even though chemically speaking they're the same drug. Things like that. And Joe Biden was one of the guys that helped write the bills and help pass them. So that, yeah, that's pretty bad. You've got his past support for cutting Social Security and Medicare. Not good. So Joe Biden also supported the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He advocated for the terrible trade deals like NAFTA, the TPP. And overall, Joe Biden is just the embodiment of like the typical corporate Democrat. This is what's so hilarious about how Trump and the Republicans have tried to paint Joe Biden as this kind of nefarious, socialist, Marxist, I don't even know, because at the same time, as they're trying to like push this conspiracy theory about, you know, the socialist agenda, at that same time, they're saying, oh, it's Sleepy Joe. His brain doesn't even work, you know? So there's this really contradictory narrative going on. And I know a lot of people will say, well, no, it's actually, you know, Kamala and all the other Democrats that are trying to push this socialist agenda. They're literally gonna push Joe Biden off the cliff, you know. Like, I don't know, like Bernie Sanders is gonna rappel down through the White House window on Inauguration Day, slit Joe Biden's throat, toss him out the window, and like take over or something. I don't know. It's really people that don't understand like the status of progressives in the Democratic Party. And if you think that the Democratic Party is secretly like they're really socialist and that's what they want to do, then why did they always shit talk Bernie Sanders and consolidate around Joe Biden, who was the most conservative out of all the people running for the in the Democratic primary? Like these theories, if you just think about them for a little bit, they don't make any sense. And I think honestly that's why these attacks of socialism against Joe Biden weren't effective, because nobody's falling for this. Nobody thinks that Joe Biden is secretly a socialist, or that he has any kind of even sympathy for these kind of ideas that Bernie Sanders was talking about. He's really just a typical corporate Democrat. In fact, a lot of these things in this little poop sample are things that you would expect a Republican to support. Things like endless wars, you know, things like cutting Social Security and Medicare. These are really traditionally Republican positions. And it just goes to show that he's, Joe Biden, he's not really of the left. He's flexible, but if people are thinking he's going to be this kind of radical politician, that's just not realistic to me. And so then let's get down to why I voted for Biden. It really comes down to the parties for me, because while there are bad things about Joe Biden, and I voted for him, I felt pretty good when I went to vote for him, just because I think Trump has been so toxic. The real reason I vote Democrat is because they are a way, way better party than the Republican Party. But let's go through some similarities between them first, some things they have in common. Both the Republican and the Democratic Party are financed by and beholden to the richest Americans and powerful corporations, and they're both generally supportive of the military-industrial complex. But there's some really big differences between the two parties. For one, the Republican Party is constantly engaging in anti-intellectualism and conspiratorial thinking, and they deny climate change. When everything is a conspiracy. Everything is a damn conspiracy. To me, the conspiracy is that these rich people and these corporations are donating money to political campaigns in order to affect the outcome of legislation that's going to benefit them personally. They are conspiring with the politicians to do this. So in effect, that is a conspiracy. But then on the Republican side, they can't really address that kind of corruption. So they have to come up with these weird conspiracies, these outlandish things like, no, you know what it actually is? It's cannibal pedophiles. That's what it actually, no. You don't need to say they're cannibal pedophile. Yeah, sure, Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile. Probably a lot of the people that hung out with him, like Donald Trump, were pedophiles and shit, but that's not the underlying reason that our system is so broken, And on the other side, you have the Democrats that respect the expertise of scientists and doctors, and they actually take climate change seriously. Another thing, the Republican Party is fundamentally regressive and exclusionary, and they're tolerant of racist groups, while the Democratic Party acknowledges the need for societal reform and the shifting demographics of the populace. Basically, the Republican Party, I feel like they just want to go back to the 1950s. That's really what they want to do. Just think about the fact that if you find yourself in a party where the neo-Nazis and these white supremacist groups, they feel comfortable in that party, I feel like you need to kind of rethink your political affiliation. Kind of ask yourselves, well, why are these guys here? The truth is that the Republican Party is super comfortable just mingling with these kind of far-right groups. They realize that a pretty big portion of their political coalition is they're just racist people. I don't know what the percent of the Republican Party holds these beliefs, but the Republican Party now, let me just remind people, Democrats have won the popular vote, I think, in either 7 or 8 of the last presidential elections. I should have had this this fact on a slide or something, but the fact is that the majority of America is Democratic or Democrat leaning, and so the Republican Party has to squeeze itself around this ever shrinking group of people in order to maintain some sort of relevance. And they just get more and more crazy as the years go on, it seems like. That in itself is just a pretty simple reason for me. I don't want to share a party with the neo-Nazis. I don't want to be on that side. That is what that side is. They're always playing this little tiptoe game of, yeah, we're not really racist, but we're not going to say anything that's going to like alienate the neo-Nazis. You know what I mean? Like, no, you should alienate the neo-Nazis. Like, these are the people that we fought 2 world wars against, and I guess we kind of forgot about that. The third difference, the Republican Party mythologizes wealth and individualism, while the Democrat Party promotes the role of government in helping poor people and otherwise disadvantaged groups. There's this idea that Republicans like to throw out, and the idea that they're pushing is that the rich people, there's something special about them. They managed to reach this point. If you haven't managed to reach that point, well, you're doing something wrong. You're not trying hard enough. And these rich people, they don't owe anything to society, because asking anything of these people who have been successful would somehow, be unfair to them. They've worked so hard. It's really amazing to me that there's people out there that are working at like McDonald's or Walmart that are like, yeah, get your scummy hands off my billionaires, like, dude, like the wealthiest people are literally the only group in the last 30 years that have seen any positive increase in their living standards. And yet the Republican Party has somehow convinced millions of Americans that what's good for Jeff Bezos and what's good for Donald Trump is somehow what's good for you. Yeah, I don't get that. I think it's very damaging to a society when people don't believe that the government is capable of helping them. Because if you think about it, the government does help you every day in, various different ways. When you drink your water out of your tap, unless you live in Flint, Michigan, that is. I mean, when you drink your water, you expect it to be clean. That's the government. Congress has become this do-nothing institution, and it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy where the more they don't fix the problems, the more people think they're just totally incapable of it, and even that if they try to do it, it would be somehow harmful. The whole Republican scheme is to make people reject things like universal health care, reject any kind of climate action, reject all these things that absolutely need to be done because they don't trust the government now enough to do it. So looking ahead these next 4 years, I think there's one threat that really supersedes everything else. All these problems I've gone over in this video, there's one thing that really just tops them all, and that's the threat of inaction. I really think that as a country, we can't afford to have a Congress and a government that's, constantly obstructing each other. Just the partisanship, it's gotten to this ridiculous level where the Democrats have this list of policy positions, the Republicans have this list of policy positions that are like diametrically opposed, and any sort of compromise is seen as basically weak or giving in to the other side. When you're faced with really serious problems like this country is, the government has to be able to come to some sort of common ground. So that's basically it for this video. I'm in the process of editing it right now, so I feel like it's probably going to run a little long, but if you watch this whole thing, I appreciate it. Be sure to like, share the video with your friends and everything, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. This will probably be the last political video I do for a while, just because I'm tired of thinking about it, honestly. But there'll be some more content, some different things coming up in the future. Anyway, take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in the next video.